We're going to talk about fertilizer. How many of you actually fertilize your own yard? Okay. Or you have someone else do it? Okay, that's fine. That's fine. So, let's see.
I got you.
Am I, okay. Oh, because am I too far away?
I don't know. Maybe you are. Yeah, come back a little closer.
I broke it.
Yeah, okay, hold on. Let's see. What? It's working perfectly fine.
Anyway, isn't that a lovely slide? Not that we want your grass doesn't have to be that green. If it's not, it's still okay.
There you go. Let's try that. There we go.
Okay, there we go. So I decided to go ahead and
Weird.
okay. Oh, you don't think this will work?
Oh, I will do it for you.
Okay. Okay. So real quick, fertilizer, as you can see up there, chemical or natural substance. So think manures, things like that. Added to soil or land, which I got a kick out of because soil you would think would work. But anyway, to increase its fertility, and then of course fertility, we think of productiveness. So, okay, there we go. Drum roll, please. But in nature, nobody goes out in the forest, right, and scatters some fertilizer. And one of the big things is because in forests and just in nature, prairies and stuff, all the organic matter just falls and just stays right there, whereas we typically cart it out to the yard or to the road. Thank you. So the organic matter is really, like I said, continually added to the soil surface, which would be great if we do that in our own landscapes. And a healthy soil food web helps with the nutrient recycling, which is basically nature's way to fertilize plants. So where we will put a lot of fertilizer out at one time and it gets a big dose, nature does little bits quite often. So if you guys ever wake up at 3 a.m. and you can't sleep, you can always Google the soil food web because it's fascinating. There's all sorts of information. But you can see, and you guys have the handouts, so you have all this on there, but fungi, bacteria, protozoa, all sorts of different microorganisms as well as macroorganisms are in the soil. And their activity of, you know, living, creating acids, dying, and all of that is what actually fertilize plants. So next, basically, if you take care of your soil, the soil will take care of your plants. Okay? As I don't know if any of you heard feed the soil, not the plants, because that's an old adage too, where you just take care of the soil. So if you guys haven't thought about it in a while, these are all the nutrients that are needed for plants. Typically, when we think of a fertilizer, though, we usually think of NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. But there's a number of other ones. If you're growing palms, you may have palm fertilizers that have some of the other micronutrients because they have a big need for that. And then we go on to, thank you. But often humans will go ahead and get a bag of synthetic fertilizer and then, you know, go ahead and scatter it out. But the big thing is we don't even test the soil first. So this is a big thing that really helps to find out what we have in the soil to begin with. Do we even need to add phosphorus? Do we even need to add potassium? And then usually our assumption is we need to just keep on adding them, but we don't always need to. And I do want to point out, oops, sorry, Nick. That fertilizer, the 26-211, is considered complete because it has N, P, and K. And so now we can find ones without phosphorus. Sometimes we can even find them without phosphorus and potassium if all we need to do is add nitrogen. So this gives you an idea why we don't want to just necessarily continually add nutrients. Because if you get an excess level, say nitrogen, it'll tie up potassium and calcium. So the different nutrients can tie up the other ones. So continually adding without knowing what you have can be a problem too, okay? So I meant to bring these soil tests, but if you guys are interested, you can give me your email and I can send you the soil test form. And I have the highlighted B test because that $7 test will give you the amount, not only your pH, but also the amount of phosphorus, potassium, and magnesium. And then we would use the results of your soil test to know what analysis would work best. Just recently on one of our My Brevard Yard site visits that we did, they were high in everything and all they had to do was add nitrogen. And I had a bit of a time trying to find a nitrogen, just nitrogen, that was legal to use with the fertilizer ordinance because you're supposed to have at least 50% slow release nitrogen, so that gave me a trick. And this is an example of an analysis that we'd have where a lawn doesn't need, or any part of the yard needs, any phosphorus. So a 1608, and the numbers give you the percentage of that nutrient by weight in the fertilizer bag. And typically, nitrogen is going to give you foliage, green up the plant, phosphorus, flowers and fruit, and then the potassium is for the roots. Okay? So synthetic fertilizers basically work as feeding the plant. They're 50% of it's usually quick release. It's available, it's used, and then as it continues to go, it's just always available over a period of time, but it just goes directly in, picked up by the plant and used. So we want to go ahead, and it mentions there that the plants have it pretty easy, so they're not excreting carbohydrates to encourage the soil microbes. And we want to apply this when plants are actively growing. So that's why we don't recommend fertilizing in the winter when plants are dormant, because if they don't pick it up, it'll go straight through the soil and can end up in our water bodies. So basically you can think of growing it hydroponically when we're using synthetic fertilizers. And because synthetic fertilizers are made of salts, they can also harm or kill soil microbes if they come into contact with them in the soil. And so, you know, when we go ahead and apply it, that's, I think, on an upcoming one. Oh, I did want to mention rock powder. So rock powders can remineralize the soil, and our Florida soils are very poor. They've been underwater, under oceans, you know. We get a lot of hot temperatures, we get a lot of rain. So you may find that applying, this product is called azomite, but if you just do a Google search for rock powder, you can find, you know, different products. But basically, they're typically volcanic source, and they have a lot of different trace elements, and so you can find your plants will respond even when you're not adding NP and K. You can see a benefit just from remineralizing. And if you guys are growing fruit crops or vegetables, I really recommend this because it makes your food more nutritious, because the fruit and stuff will have more of the nutrients in it. So other ways to fertilize, fish hydrolysate. This is like a fish and liquid seaweed fertilizer. And so this is something that you could use just for houseplants and things like that. The humic substances, the fulvic acid and the humic acid, they've actually found through research at UF that it helps citrus trees because it helps with the roots and stuff. And liquid seaweed is something that I've been telling people about for a long time because it supplies over 60 trace elements. And research has shown that it helps plants through flood, drought, and cold, which we've had. I don't know how much you guys have had over here, but we've had some pretty good. Okay. The other thing is, too, is that it can help plants, you know, just have more nutrients that they need to go ahead and be healthier. And here we have one of the things that I found out, St. Augustine grass. When we look at the different microbes, mycorrhizal fungi have a symbiotic relationship with plants. And I talked to our guys up in Gainesville, and one of the research students found out that the mycorrhizae glomus species actually has a relationship with St. Augustine grass. And many of the organic fertilizers have microbes in it, either the beneficial mycorrhizae or even bacteria and such. So you could inoculate your yard with some organic fertilizer that has glomus and then help your St. Augustine grass. So I figure, why not try everything you can to help St. Augustine grass, right? Why not? So when you apply, you want to go ahead and broadcast the fertilizer over the soil, and then immediately after, water it in lightly. The reason for that is that if it's a synthetic fertilizer, you don't want any of the nitrogen to volatilize. Plus, we want to water it in lightly so that it's dissolved and goes to the root system so it can be absorbed. If we don't do that and it goes past the root systems, guess where it'll end up? In the groundwater and then the Indian River lagoons. So we don't want that. Fertilizer spikes. Oftentimes people will buy fertilizer spikes, but they aren't an efficient way to get the fertilizer out. If you put a spike in the ground here, it has to be dissolved in water. So unless there's roots down here, it's totally missed the root system. And we assume the roots are going out everywhere. So you can take the spikes and hammer them in a bag and then broadcast that, and that'll work fine. And don't use weed and feed on St. Augustine if you love your trees and shrubs, because the broadleaf herbicide in the weed and feed is picked up by the broadleaf trees and shrubs. So if you do use it, just use it once. It shuts down photosynthesis for a time. So if you do that, you won't have any long-term harm. But if you used weed and feed throughout the whole summer, you could start to kill your trees or shrubs. And I just wanted to real quick just kind of recap the fertilizer ban. So we basically have no nitrogen and phosphorus June 1st through September 30th. We should have at least 50% slow release nitrogen, though the organic fertilizers typically are much higher, maybe up to 80% or so of slow release nitrogen. We only want to apply 1 pound of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet. And then, of course, don't water or don't fertilize if we might have heavy rain, which we can have heavy rain even not in the ban time. So, anytime, well, with the storms that we had yesterday, that shows us, right? Did you guys get much over here? Did you? Okay. I heard some places got some and others didn't. And then the last thing is to use a shield. If you're broadcasting fertilizer, you don't want to get it on the road and into water bodies. The phosphorus rule, you have to have a test to show you need it. You can only apply 1/4 pound per 1,000 square feet in one application with a maximum of 2 in 1 year. So that's pretty standard. And then I want everyone to realize that if your plants are stressed, they have insects, diseases, and things like that, then we want to try and figure out what the stress is. And wrong light conditions can be a stressor. So if a plant is planted in shadier locations and it needs full sun, or the opposite, that could be a stress. And so pests are basically a good sign, whether it's an insect or disease. The other one could be improper watering, and that's what I do. I don't always water often enough. So a lack of water could be a stress, and you could have insect problems or something like that. But nutritional deficiencies, if the other two are taken care of, it's not light and it's not water, you want to look at nutritional, because that's pretty much going to be what's going on. And it could be because of a lack of nutrients, too many, excess, or maybe the trace elements are missing, something like that. And of course, weather extremes. But when it comes to the flood, drought, and cold, the liquid seaweed can help there. If you spray your plants the night that it's supposed to get really cold, it can lower the freezing point by 2 to 3 degrees by increasing the carbohydrate content of the leaves. So that can help. Oh, and I wanted to point out, 2015, the USDA and the NRCS deemed soil health to be the big initiative. And so 2015 was the International Year of the Soil. So agriculture is doing a lot to take care of soil health, and so are a lot of gardeners and stuff. So it's really an important topic. So if we can take care of our soil, we would not only help our plants, but also the environment, basically water quality, because organic matter increases nutrient holding capacity and water holding capacity. And
can you talk about the My Brevard Yard program?
Yes. So for the My Brevard Yard program, we go ahead and train master gardeners, or myself, depending upon how many we have and all of that. But we've been doing a number of them, and we would come to your landscape. So I would give you a pre-site visit survey. You would let me know about fertilizer, irrigation, and then what what help you would like in your yard. We come to your yard. We take a soil test. We also go ahead and calibrate your irrigation system. One zone for 15 minutes to see if you're putting out enough water or too much. And then we also will go ahead and test your well water for irrigation purposes. And then after we do those things, if you have questions, we go all over the yard. We help you with suggestions, plant ID, or whatever. It costs $50. But we come to your place and you have us for at least an hour, hour and a half, just depends. And so we've had a lot of people this year. Last year we did a total of 52 site visits, and this year I think we're so far up to about 30 now. So if it continues to go on, we're going to get a lot more site visits this year, which is great because we have people who have a lawn spray company. So just recently, I think I sent out 8 fertilizer recommendations yesterday. And one of them, their yard did need phosphorus. So I told them, please give this to your lawn care company so they know that they do need to apply phosphorus. And then, that way they can pass it on to them. And so we see all sorts of soil test results. So they really, really vary. And, if they've been cared for in the past, then, it really helps us to know, do you actually need the phosphorus and do you still need potassium? Because, we've had some that are very high. So, yeah.
And lastly, mentioned the Master Gardener program. Can you tell everybody at home too, as well as our audience?
Yes.
A little bit about that, because that plays into the Mother Backyard program.
Yes. So the Master Gardener program is basically one where people who are very interested in gardening, I train them. So I've just gone through the class. It's generally January through March. So they get 10 weeks of classes from 9 to 3, go over all sorts of topics. And then they volunteer. So the first year they volunteer 75 hours just so they can learn a lot. And then after that, it's just 35 hours a year to remain active. We have monthly meetings. We do field trips and stuff. So for a lot of people who are very interested in gardening, it's a fun way to be involved. And they still get to learn more and get plants. So, yeah.
What was the name of the lawn program?
My Brevard Yard. Yeah. So you can email me and I can send you the pre-site visit survey. If people prefer to pay by credit card, then they can go through the Eventbrite. Otherwise, it can be a check or cash or whatever. But yeah, yes?
You train any of the lawn service companies to do soil testing?
No. Now, we've been working with lawn companies through the lagoon-friendly lawns, but we haven't necessarily, I don't know that any of them, you know, to do a soil sample, you just take 10 to 15 samples in an area where it looks, you know, generally the same, and we mix it together and then send it off.
Seems to me someone would be wanting to do that as a full service package.
Yes, yes. And it certainly is what we would recommend, because fertilizing without a soil test, and so if you get a soil test, if it's to the point where the levels are medium, you know, it would be good to test the next year, but even at most you would want to go 2 years, and then you do want to test again just to find out. So you're right, it would definitely be a very good thing for them to do. Yes?
Now, is this kind of what KBB does with their lawn-friendly stuff?
Lagoon-friendly lawn?
Or KBB, no?
No, they basically, you can go online and submit an application, and that's pretty much what you do. Yeah, yeah,
We have the information.
yeah.
If you want to switch off with.
Yeah, I think he may want to,
And then we'll do more questions at the end.
yeah, okay. So you, mm-hmm.
So how many of you know what IFAS is? How many of you know what extension is? How many of you know what the University of Florida is? Okay, all right, we got that.
It's a championship school.
Sometimes. Okay, so IFAS is the Institute of Food and Agricultural Sciences. Extension is an extension of the university into the community, and what we do is we bring research-based information to members of our community. So that's when I said we don't advocate, is because we're just here to bring the science to you, and then you can decide what you think about St. Augustine grass. And then maybe off the record, I'll tell you what I think of St. Augustine grass. Okay? How's that? So we're going to, and I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go along. Go ahead. So I'm going to talk to you about native plants. And a couple of things. I went to a great in-service training today where we talked a lot about using plants, doing plant designs according to the habitats in which we live, right? And we don't think about that enough. We go to the garden center, we go to the nursery, or some of us might go to the box store and see things on the clearance rack. But and don't use me as an example, because I'm a plant addict and I'm also trained, so I know what's good and what's bad. But we don't think about, when we get home, we don't think about where we're plopping these plants. We just think that looks pretty and we're going to plop it out there, and that's not always a good thing, you know. And I would say when I'm talking plants, I'm talking St. Augustine grass too, okay? Because we get just a little crazy with that stuff, and more on that in a minute. Okay, so we're going to talk about native plants. We're going to talk about a few of my favorites, and it's important for y'all to know what's my favorite, because that should be your favorite, all right? And then we're going to talk about some design basics, because here's what I find people do. Well, just go on. I'll get ahead of myself, because I get excited. First of all, why should you use natives? You're going to use natives because it's the right plant to put in the right place, okay? You learn nothing else from me tonight, learn right plant, right place. That goes to St. Augustine grass. It goes for sunshine mimosa. It goes for every plant that you could purchase or put out in your landscape, okay? I don't care what it is. It's right plant, right place. It might require less water and fertilizer. Notice I said it might, because if it's not the right plant in the right place, it's going to require as much, if not more, water and fertilizer than an exotic non-native plant, okay? It's not boring when design principles are used. I hear a lot of people say, well, you know, native plants, they don't have flowers, they're kind of boring, they're just green, they just sit there. But that's not necessarily true. If they're maintained right, and if they're the right plant in the right place, they can actually be very attractive, and I'll show you some examples. That one right there is beautiful. I love Cephalanthus, which is button bush, but that is a wetland plant. That plant has to be put in a very wet area. So most of us in this room are not going to plant this in our yard, right? So but if that plant is in the right place, it's a beautiful, beautiful plant. Let's see, what else? They will have fewer pest problems. That's true only if it is the right plant in the right place. Okay? Because I've had people say to me, well, I can't grow natives because they always die. And I say, well, that's because you're putting the wrong plant in the wrong place. It doesn't matter whether it's native or not. Okay? They are easy to grow. That's true if it's the right plant in the right place. Okay? I'm getting ahead of myself. They attract wildlife. Really important. One of the biggest reasons, we all love the lagoon, and we talk a lot about that, and that's important. But one of the other biggest reasons to use native plants in the landscape is for biodiversity. Okay? People don't talk about that enough. We do not have a lot of diversity in our landscapes. We do what we call STP. Have you heard that before, Sally? I know, I'm stealing that. I am so stealing that. STP, same 10 plants. I love that, right? Every landscape, the same 10 plants, right? We have to stop doing that. And we don't have to stop doing that just because we want a prettier landscape. It's not just aesthetics. We need to stop doing that because we need to have insects. We have to have insects. If we do not have insects, you die, you die, you die, you die, you die, you die, you die. Dylan and I might go on. But we have to have insects. And they were talking today about a study that was done a few years ago in Germany. I think it was 2015. And I'd actually read it, this research study, and I'd forgotten about it. But they went out and they collected insects. And they found that there were 75% fewer insects in Germany than there used to be. 75%. Let that sink in. You know, and we're dead serious when we say we cannot live on this planet without insects. We cannot. And so we really have got to build up diversity in our landscapes. And we can do that with natives. We can do that with non-natives as well. But we need to have a good balance, right? And those natives help bring in some of those native insects that we really need to preserve and help build those populations back up. Why aren't they used more? Well, number one is developers. STP, right? The same 10 plants. It's cheaper. In the short run, it's cheaper. They're easier to get a hold of. And you know, I don't know if you all know Sharon Dolan, who has Maple Street Natives down in Palm Bay. And she and I have talked about this. And one of the big challenges we have is we go around, I'm going to recommend some native plants tonight, and you may have a really hard time finding them. So that is a problem. And so Sharon and I have talked about that. And she recognizes that in the nursery industry, this is a problem too. Because sometimes these native plants, they have a very specific behavior, and they're difficult to propagate. So when they're difficult to propagate, then they're more difficult for the nurseries to get a hold of. So we have to change that. We have to figure out how to make them more accessible. People don't know about them. There's probably a whole lot of native plants that most people just aren't even aware of. They're not flashy. They're usually not sexy, right? They're just, many of them really are just kind of green, right? But you have to learn how to use them, and we'll talk about that. And they attract wildlife, and for a lot of people, that's a bad thing. How many times, Sally, do you get a call from somebody who says that there are these worms on their plants? Excuse me. There are worms on their plants, and they're eating their plant. And you find out it's a caterpillar, right? That's going to be a butterfly. But these people are, you know, they don't understand that. So wildlife is not always a good thing. Snakes, those are bad, right? Alligators, well, I don't want alligators either. I'm game with you on that. So here's when you should not use natives. Don't use natives if your conditions are not favorable, you don't have the right light. If it's a shade-loving plant, don't plant it in the sun. Don't use a native in that situation. If you don't have the right water situation, you know, if that plant is a water-loving plant and you don't have a lake or a wetland or a swamp, don't use that plant. And this sounds simple, but people make these mistakes all the time. And so on. You can read that. If you're in a hurry, if you're really in a hurry, don't use native plants because many times they're slower growing than our non-natives. So you may have to be a little patient. That or you have to put out a little bit more money to get a bigger plant if you want a fuller landscape right now. Okay, so you can't be in a hurry. And what was that last one? Oh yeah, if you think you're never going to have to go outside again. I don't know how many people say, I'm going to plant natives and I'm not going to have to work in the yard. Wrong. Native or not, they are still going to require maintenance. They are still going to require some sort of maintenance. All right, go ahead. So, a few of my favorites. You have to remember these are my favorites now, okay? A few of my favorites. Spotted Bee Balm. To bring insects into our yard, this is a great plant. It's an annual. It's going to reseed. It's going to reseed a lot. And you're going to have lots of babies next spring. But that's okay because you can easily pull them out, very easily pull them out, or you can let them grow. And when you let them grow, they do this, come around August, September, they will put on this colorful show. In July, cut them back. Because in July, they're going to be about this tall and they're going to want to start to lodge or they're going to want to start to fall over, right? And they're going to look attractive. Late June, early July, cut them back about, I don't know, what, a foot, Sally? Yeah. I cut them back about a foot and they're going to thicken up. And then when they start blooming later in the summer, you're going to have a nice, compact, dense plant, and it's going to look really attractive. And it's going to be covered. I mean, covered in bees and wasps and all sorts of things. And it's going to be really great. And you're going to love it because it's going to reseed. And you're going to have more of them next year. But never have they become a problem in my garden. Never have they become to the point where it's like, oh, I've got to get rid of these. It's always, well, there's one coming up. I don't want it right there, right? So it's just a little seedling. I just pop it out. Very easy to manage. You want to use these in the border. And what is the border? So you guys are going to learn a few design tips, okay? Because the average person is the worst landscape designer in the planet, right? People don't know how to design with plants. But designing with plants is the same concept that you would use to design your house, to design your wardrobe. For some of us, that's easy, not everyone. But anything that you're designing, right? When you're coordinating things, when you're putting things together, when you're dressing up the dining room table to have friends over for dinner, whatever it is, you're always coordinating, right? You want things to coordinate. You do that in the garden. You do that in your landscape. Even if you just have a lawn and you just want to call it a lawn and you've got some plants up by the house, you do the same thing. You don't mix colors that are obnoxious together. Like my favorite worst combination is the green and yellow Trinette Schefflera with crotons. And I don't have a picture because I don't like it. It makes me nervous. It makes me crazy, right? I think a garden, like a lawn should be a happy place, right? You should look at it and you should feel good about it. You shouldn't look at it and say, I got to get away from this. And that's what that does to me. So when I talk about the border, we always in landscape design, we always want to start at the edge of the landscape bed. You want to start with the lowest plant and you want to step back and you want to go higher and higher and higher until you get to the very back of the border or the very back of the bed, and that's where you want your tallest material, right? So you always want your tallest plants at the very back. So something like the Monarda that I just showed you, that's going to get about 3 to 4 feet high, so you're going to have that probably in the middle of the border because you're going to have taller stuff behind it. Or the taller stuff behind it might be a fence, or it might be the wall of the house, right? Or it might be a structure of some kind, okay? All right, go ahead. Oh, no, go back to that for a minute. One more thing I want to point out. You should always mass plants in groups of 3s and 5s and 7s and 9s. Don't plant just one plant unless it's a very large plant, okay? Because when you put just one croton out there in the middle of a big green lawn, what do you think happens to that croton? Just sort of gets lost, right? And it looks kind of silly. Now, if you planted 3 together, right? Now we've got something started here, right? We've started something because that's going to catch your eye. And it's going to draw your eye to it, and it's going to be more interesting than if you just have one croton. Let's say you put one croton and one crepe myrtle and one of those Scheffleras, and you put those all together out there. Yeah, that's not going to do much, right? You know, that doesn't have good 55 mile per hour view either. We always talk about, you know, if it looks good when you're going 55 miles per hour, then it looks good, right? It's done right. So think about that. Okay, thank you. Someone asked me about ground covers. Ground covers are, we define a ground cover as anything that is used to cover the ground, okay? So ground covers may actually be tall shrubs in some cases, right? So a ground cover doesn't necessarily have to be a really low growing plant, but when we're replacing turf grass, it's probably going to be a low growing plant. So something like sunshine mimosa can be fantastic. Now, I will say that sunshine mimosa can cause some problems for you because in the wintertime, it might die back a little bit. And when you have something dying back a little bit and it's wintertime in Florida, guess what's going to happen? You're going to get some weeds that are going to say, hey, check this out. There's some bare soil. I'm moving in. So I don't know that I would replace, you know, several thousand square feet with sunshine mimosa because I think that's going to be a little challenging to take care of. You're probably better off sticking with some St. Augustine, but change your standards of the St. Augustine, okay? Here's something really important. Are you listening? You guys out there, are you listening? Change your standards, okay? A weed in your St. Augustine does not mean that your week has been ruined, okay? It's okay to have some weeds as long as they're green. Just mow them. Just mow them. It doesn't have to be this perfect emerald green carpet of grass. Okay? It doesn't have to be. And that's part of this whole challenge of when we're talking about natives and we're talking about using all these different plants in the landscape is in some cases we have to change the way we look at this. And I think Nick was alluding to that in the very beginning. He was talking about aesthetics and what are the norms, right? And we have to think about, you know, St. Augustine does not have to be perfect all the time. It can have some flaws in it. So lots of different ground covers. Here's one of my favorite plants of all time, and this is a Simpsonstopper. How many of you are familiar with Simpsonstopper? Raise your hand. Look at this. This is one of the most beautiful plants that we can use in our landscapes. It's native. It's available. You can find this plant. I know that Maple Street Natives has it. I know Rockledge Gardens has it. This is a fabulous small tree. You can grow it as a small tree. You can grow it as a shrub. Either one, your choice. I grow it as both. I have several in my yard. They have flowers that attract bees like crazy. The fruits are attractive to birds. Birds love the fruits. The leaves and the flowers are very fragrant. You crush the leaves and they smell like, what would you say, Sally? They're very aromatic, kind of spicy, right? Just wonderful, wonderful plant. Go ahead. And you guys can read all the particulars. I took the bark picture out. The Simpsonstopper has beautiful bark. Beautiful bark. So you know, when you prune it into a tree, and when we talk about using trees in the landscape, we always like to think about the bark also, because if the bark is attractive, right, that adds more interest to the garden, right? So the Simpsonstopper does that well. And it makes a beautiful shrub plant. You can use it in a shrub border. What's a shrub border? A shrub border, think of, instead of a fence, instead of a hedge, a straight line of rectangular shrubs. I don't know if you guys know this, but most shrubs don't grow in a rectangular shape unless you make them that way, okay? That's not natural, all right? So a shrub border is a natural border of shrubs. It's usually curvilinear, so it usually has a nice flow. And also when you have curvilinear shapes in your yard, it's easier to mow, right? So you don't have to get to the corner, back up, turn, then get that little angle that you missed. If you have a curve, you can just zoom right around the curve, right? Or your mower guy can. So a shrub border then is used in lieu of a fence or in front of a fence to create kind of that backdrop for you, also create some privacy and so on and so forth. It's a lot easier to grow a shrub border than it is to grow a hedge, right? Because a hedge you have to constantly keep that maintained. Plus the plants over time are not going to respond in a positive way to that constant pruning. So a specimen plant is that one plant. It's usually just one plant that you're showing off, okay? And maybe that one specimen plant is going to draw people's attention to something in your yard that you want them to be drawn to. Maybe it's your front door, okay? So maybe it's some plant that just brings their eye towards the front door and it welcomes them to your house, okay? So think of it that way, okay. Oh, there it is. It got put in the wrong place there. There's the bark of a Simpsonstopper. Now, isn't that attractive? It looks really nice. And no, that's not going to peel and fall all over the yard. It's not going to do that. It's not messy that way. It's just very attractive. So I talked about the shrub border. There's kind of an example of that. Go on. Another one of my favorites is Walter's Viburnum. Now, a lot of people don't realize that Walter's Viburnum has beautiful white flowers, is a fantastic butterfly and bee plant. And the reason they don't know that is because they keep them trimmed into nice little rectangles, or sometimes into nice little round balls. But if you let a Walter's Viburnum grow like a Walter's Viburnum wants to, you're going to get a, let's see, what did I put up there? You're going to get about a 20, you're not going to get 25 feet tall. I've got one in my yard that's about 7 years old. I've never pruned it, and it's probably 8 feet high, okay? So 25 feet, I don't think it's going to do that. It produces these beautiful flowers. It's full of bees. Love this plant, and I don't touch it, okay? Now, if you are looking for a plant that you can shape so that you look like Disney World, this is a good one to do that. But just know that this is a really attractive shrub and can be, the birds also love the berries because it does produce a little berry. Not edible for us, but mockingbirds love it, the cardinals love it, so on and so forth. Drought tolerant too. Go ahead, Nick. Maybe. Florida privet. This is one of those yawn, boring looking plants. But
It's one of my favorites.
I love Florida privet. It is one of the best plants out there for those of you that really want squares and rectangles and triangles and octagons and hexagons and things like that. When you want those kinds of shapes, this is a fabulous plant for that. It's also a fabulous plant, shrub, to just let it grow and do its thing. And it will produce berries that are attractive to birds and other wildlife, so it's good in that sense also. But, you know, so many people are looking for that shrub that they can keep, you know, as a screen or something like that, that they can prune into those shapes. So this is a good one for that. This is a great one to use instead of Indian hawthorn. I am so tired of seeing Indian hawthorn pruned into shapes, or podocarpus pruned into shapes, right? So this is a great shrub to use in place of those. It's moderately salt tolerant, and it is drought tolerant. That's another great thing about it. And while I'm talking about drought tolerance, let me just say this. All native plants, just like any other plant, needs to be watered during establishment, okay? So, you know, I hear people say, well, you never have to water a native plant. Well, that's not true. You do too. All plants need water, except maybe cactus. But even they need water eventually, right? Okay, this is Linda's favorite shrub. This one right here. Not only is it her favorite shrub, it is her favorite native shrub, but it's her favorite shrub, right, Sally? Linda loves this shrub. This is Jamaican caper. Jamaican caper does not get used enough in the landscape. People don't even know about it. Look at that flower. Oh my gosh, isn't that gorgeous? The foliage on this is gorgeous. It's got kind of a silvery sheen to it. Just beautiful foliage. It's the stems look kind of furry, kind of brown furry, and they're not, but it just looks that way. It's really a neat plant. It could get about 20 feet tall. It has a really nice vase shape. Okay, that one, I have one in my yard that's probably, what would you say, 8 feet tall, that one in the front, and just a really nice triangle shape. I've never pruned it. It just naturally grows, has a really nice base shape to it. So it's one of those plants that looks really good even in a formal type lawn, okay? Go ahead. And then this is the bean pods that it produces. So those flowers turn into, first the brown ones on the bottom, and then eventually it turns into the red ones with the little black bean at the top. And then, of course, birds and other wildlife love those. So it's a fabulous native plant. Okay, this is one of Linda's other favorites. Okay, oh, these are all my favorites. Okay, I love fiddlewood. Do you like fiddlewood, Nick?
I got 4 in my yard.
Okay, you kind of like it then. All right, so fiddlewood produces a beautiful flower like you see at the top there. And they're just kind of arching, right? These flowers, they just kind of come out and they arch. They're really beautiful. And the foliage is kind of shiny and green and kind of glossy. It just looks really, really nice. It has a nice oval shape. So, and I'm going to talk more about that. I won't get ahead of myself. I get excited again. Highly drought tolerant, right? So once it's established, you're not going to need to water this guy. Moderately salt tolerant. So if you're along the water, you could probably use this. Excellent as a hedge or a screen, but don't prune it. into squares and rectangles and things, because if you do, you're not going to get the benefits of these flowers, right? Which also turn into a fruit, which is attractive to wildlife. Go ahead. So when I talk about shapes, in your landscape, combine plants of different shapes, all right? So a vase-shaped shrub with a rounded shrub in front of it is far more attractive than if you have 2 columns, right? Or if you have a row of rectangles, right? And remember, you know, we're talking about Florida friendly here, right? We want to be Florida friendly. We want to be lagoon friendly. And those shapes are not any of those things because they require so many inputs. All right, you think about it. You got to have somebody prune that. If they're using electric head shears, what are the, right? What are the emissions from those electric head shears? Right? So you're dealing with that. You're dealing with all the fuel that's involved in that. You've got so many inputs to maintain this rectangle. Why do we have to have rectangles? Right? When we have plants that are beautiful, we have Florida natives that are beautiful. And when mixed with non-natives, especially, we get that diversity. We can have a really attractive landscape. Go ahead. I got sidetracked again. People do not use ornamental grasses enough in the landscape, and then if they do it all wrong. Ornamental grasses are fabulous to use in the yard because they provide cover for wildlife, for one thing, which is fantastic. Birds love them. They can hide in them. Insects love them. They add movement to the garden, so they just kind of create some interest through their movement. They add a little bit of sound. They soften the garden, which I like a lot. They're really great for using around hard edges, right? Like the corner of a structure. Or if you have stairs leading up to the house, they can soften that. And they're perfect around water because of the reflection and the movement and all those things. Go ahead. So Spartina grass is one of my favorites. Use this grass. This is a great grass. And you don't have to be around water to use this grass. And you don't have to do like in the top picture there, you know, have 25 of them out there. Right? You put 3 together, or you could even use 1 because it does get rather large. You could use 1 in and around other plants, and it's really going to add a nice splash of drama to the garden. So really good stuff. And these guys, don't cut these things back, okay? This is one thing that you, and if you're driving around, okay, and you're going to see these planted along the roadside, and you're going to see them all chopped off. Don't do that. Don't do that. The reason they do that is they don't know how to take care of them. All you need to do is, in the spring, like now, take a rake, just a rake, all right? And just rake out all the dead growth. Don't cut them back. Because now you've got this thing you got this thing, right? You've got this thing, I don't know how to describe it. And then you get all the new growth coming out and you still see that thing, right? You're totally defeating the purpose of having a grass. So just take a rake or something and just pull out that dead stuff. Right? Here's another one. This is another one of my favorites. This is Fakahatchee grass. Say that 5 times fast. Fakahatchee. And this is a wonderful grass. This is bigger than a Spartina grass. You're only going to need 1 of these probably. And these are fantastic around water. Just beautiful when planted near water. And they're also just great in the yard, right? With other things. Don't just plop this out in the middle of the yard, okay? That's going to look dumb. All right, don't do that. Okay? That will look really dumb. Muhly grass, another one of my favorites. You'll see muhly grass planted in the medians if you go to Cocoa Beach along 520. You'll see a lot of muhly grass. In August, September, you'll see it the plumes turn pink. Beautiful grass. Same thing, don't cut it back. Just let it do its muhly thing. And this is one grass, because they're a little bit smaller, you do want to plant these in groups of 3s or 5s if you have the room for that, okay? This one looks a lot better in mass. Go ahead. Oh, that's it. How'd I do?
You did great.
Did I time it good?
Yeah.
All right. Questions?
Okay.
So Sally, if you want to come up and join us, we'll all do some questions together, and we'll talk a little bit more about all these fun topics and how to relate to stormwater. And
Would you recommend
maintenance?
a plant along the fence, like your fence property?
Mm-hmm.
Fences there, like, you know, most of the houses here in Salt Lake have fences. Is there
Right.
one that kind of would accent the fence, but then also stop the weeds growing?
Nothing's going to stop the weeds growing, okay, except a nuclear bomb,
No,
okay?
what is
So
a weed? What is a weed?
a weed is just a plant in a place where you don't want it,
What's
okay?
the technical definition of a weed?
Right.
Is it
So
plant growing
to me,
somewhere
queen
you don't
palms
want
are
it to grow?
weeds, okay? Because I think queen palms are just ugly.
Right.
All right, that's my personal opinion, not my professional opinion. All right, so that's my personal. Well, it is too my professional opinion too. I just think they're ugly. So if I have one in my yard, it's just a weed. You know, if somebody would pay me to cut it down, I'd let them cut it down.
Now, Spanish needle is a plant that a lot of people consider to be weedy, right? But to me, Spanish needle is anything but.
Do you need some?
Well, I have them all around.
Yeah.
I
Okay.
walk in my socks, I pull off the little needles and I throw them around. They have medicinal properties. They are actually good for your health. They help you, I forget exactly which internal organ they actually help. There's a lady that goes to all these events and she spouts how wonderful they are, and I ate some in a salad the other day.
I was just gonna
They're
say,
actually
you
very
eat it as
tasty. They're
Sure
actually
they are.
tasty.
Other questions?
So yes, ma'am. So how about you have a very
Oh, I mean, I didn't finish it. I'm sorry. I would need to know a whole lot more about your yard before I would ever make a recommendation, because I don't know what soil type is. I don't know whether it's getting full sun or part sun. And then, hang on your thought, okay? Here's something. You have a fence like this in your yard. You are not going to plant the same plant all the way around, okay? Because somewhere you're going to have more shade than you are somewhere else, right? And you need diversity. Plant different stuff. Plant some beds, all right? We can talk more about that later, but plant some beds, okay?
So like your recommendations you gave for good plants to have, so what ones do you recommend absolutely not to have? Like pepper tree was
Oh,
prevalent
obviously.
for years,
Right, right.
now they're eradicated pretty much on the beach, right?
Anything invasive, no.
Yeah. So
But everything's invasive.
No, it's not.
It's-
No.
Like this example, the cottonwood tree has been introduced here in the last like decade. They're everywhere now, and they take over like crazy. So
Carrotwood or cottonwood?
carrotwood, I'm sorry.
Yeah. So the definition, the definition of an invasive plant is one that pushes out native environments. So not everything's invasive, okay?
There are non-natives.
Yeah, but see,
That aren't invasive.
the problem is though, is we got off the sidetrack here is, my parents moved here in 1959. This was nothing but scrub brush and sand spurs, palmettos, you name it.
Right.
So that's the natural habitat here.
Right.
So when we talk about what we can introduce that is still suitable for this area, it seems like what you're talking about with a lot of things, the top 10 are things that we shouldn't have here. Or maybe there's the boring things
No.
that we shouldn't have.
No. When I'm saying, I'm not saying you shouldn't have those 10 things, okay? Those same 10 plants, I'm not saying you shouldn't have them. I'm saying that if you need to have more in addition to that, first of all. So you've got to have diversity.
Yeah.
You know, to address your statement about it was all scrub and yada, 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 that's true, but we have altered the landscape. We've altered the soil, we've altered the microclimates, and so we can't go back to that. As long as we have yards and landscapes, we can't go back to that.
Oh, yes, ma'am. But I'm saying we don't want to go back to that. was my
Right.
Point on that.
Especially the sand spurs.
But, yeah, right.
Yeah.
Because that's the natural, and they are.
Sure.
Sand spurs are
So
invasive.
Yeah.
But so let's get to the root of my question really was is, what shouldn't we have? What like tropical crap are they selling at Lowe's?
there is nothing that we shouldn't have except invasives. It's all about the right plant in the right place, okay? My yard, I should not have buttonbush because my yard is not wet enough to have buttonbush. Your yard might be, okay? I cannot grow fiddlewood in my yard, okay? Because I don't have the right habitat for fiddlewood. It's one of my favorites. But I can't grow it, okay? That's the message I'm trying to get out. It is about your yard, your habitat, right? What kind of soil do you have? What kind of conditions do you have? And then we pick your plants.
I get you. But we
So
don't
more
recommend.
specifically, so yes, right plant, right place, 100%, soil test, yes. At Lowe's, they're selling Mexican petunia, for example. I think that's kind of what you're thinking.
Oh, well,
So-
that's, yeah.
It's category 1. Is it category 1?
Yes.
It's category 1 invasive, we don't want it. In the city of Satellite Beach, we don't allow Brazilian pepper, Australian pine, or Melaleuca. However, some Melaleuca
There's still some here though.
is
right?
grandfathered in, that's
Okay.
a kind of a caveat.
No one's going to go in and
But
take
that's
it
not
out
gonna
for
go
you.
anywhere either. But carrotwood is our next big push, so we are moving to remove those. So we
Okay.
wrote a grant with the NEP, if it gets approved, we'll do a plant replacement program where residents can remove the plant, and we'll replace it with something from the list
I got
that
you.
Linda showed you
But other than
today.
invasive, there's really nothing that's detrimental to our environment
As
here.
long as you have it in the right place.
Okay,
Right.
and that's what I was really more.
Right.
Yeah.
I got you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Good discussion.
Very nice.
If you have a lawn service,
Mm-hmm.
30 years, and you want to be more environmental, and say I was listening to the soil feeding to give, and I wanted to do it on my own, how long before I would test the soil if I stopped the service?
Mhm.
Should I not wait a while
No,
and then have the soil tested?
You could get it tested, because then we'll know how much is in the soil now. Because if they've been treating it, they've been fertilizing it, we can
Right.
still test it now to know what do you need to use. Because if they've been doing it now, you wouldn't need to fertilize probably until October.
Okay, so when
When the
I
band's
get
over.
soil.
Yeah.
And the other question was, I know you say let the weeds grow, but I don't know what happened. I blame it on Derek, because he moved in next door and he got a service. And along the fence, I had these thick weeds, but they hurt. They had needles or something on them, and they were growing about that high. I had to mow
Thistles?
the lawn.
Thistles?
Maybe that's,
Thistles are
They
very
hurt.
pokey, and
Yes.
they're a winter weed, and they're real sturdy.
I
And
don't remember us having them, and all of a sudden, they're all on the fence.
yeah.
So you remember back in September last year, there was this storm that we had called Irma.
Yeah.
Remember that?
Heard about her on the news.
Yeah. So you know, you're going to get weed seeds. Weed seeds are dispersed in any number of ways. They can be on your mowing services tires of their lawnmowers, because they usually don't clean those off. They should. That's a green industry's best management practice, is to clean off the tires before they go to the next yard. So you could get them that way. You could get them from animals that are just walking through. They happen to go through and they picked up seed and they just drop it as they go on. Birds might poop and drop it. There are a gazillion ways in which you might get weeds.
So with that type of weed, and the kids use the yard.
Oh, I'd get rid of that.
I had to pull it all out. I mean, it hurt.
Yeah.
But what kind of weeds? I know it's milky and it grows flat. It's very, very common. What's it called?
Is it flowering?
No, this is a different weed that grows all the time in the lawn.
No flower?
And when it breaks, it has the milky substance coming out.
Purslane. Should be
It's very
purslane.
common.
It's not white milky,
Common
though.
in your lawn,
It's not white
other than
milky?
grass.
And it
I'm just thinking
produces
Wodelia,
flower.
which is the little yellow flower.
Yeah, and see, all the ones I'm
But
thinking
that's
of
not
are
what that is.
flowering,
That's no-
so.
It's just like a milkweed, I guess. It's just
Do you-
something that in the grass, it's always been there, and sometimes it gets worse and better.
There's a master gardener clinic at the Satellite Beach
Right.
Library.
I'm just saying, but
Bring it with
if I
you.
can, I mean,
Yeah.
I'm happy to mow over the weeds.
Yeah.
If it's not gonna.
That's
But you don't want to
the
disperse
easiest
them
thing.
either. You don't want to disperse the ones you don't like, so. that's-
Well, but the thing is, if you mow weekly, you're taking care so that they won't seed. And if you do at least every 2 weeks in the winter, you'll keep your seed bank down of weeds. So it's actually a weed control tactic, is to mow regularly.
Wow.
So that would be fine, and then,
That's probably what happened, because for some reason, I was away, and I guess 6 weeks must have went by before I mowed.
And then-
the weeds just were.
yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly
Yeah.
probably what
So
happened.
what
Talking
happens,
lawn
like-
maintenance, and you're mentioning mowing, what is the recommended height?
3.5 to 4 inches for St. Augustine and Bahia, but I like 4. But the other thing too is, I think when we say mow to 4 inches, we don't mean mow it when it's 4 inches. You want to mow the grass so it is 4 inches.
Right.
Based on what's the base you're using?
The ground, like 4 inches of
So
leaf
if your
blade.
grass grows to 6, mow it back down to 4.
And typically, the big thing is, does your mower allow you to go up to 4 inches? Just set it high, and then you know when you mow it. And if you're mowing it weekly when it's actively growing, you're not going to remove more than 1/3 of the leaf blade, and that won't be a stress for it. But if you wait too long and then you mow it and you mow a lot off, then you have a
That
stress.
seems high.
It does. A lot of people don't like it.
That's
But-
the aesthetic.
But see, then you get deeper roots.
Well, yeah, but then you get more weeds.
No, you don't. Oh, no, you
it's the
don't.
opposite.
Grass,
Just the
less
opposite.
weeds.
And more shade for the
Just the
weeds.
opposite.
So
Seeds.
I'm letting mine grow, and I'm giving, and I got a beautiful layer of weeds, just like the folks are talking
Yes.
about, so.
Keep it up,
So
keep
let it
on
grow a little
mowing.
taller, and what's I say is
Mow
you're gonna
higher.
have a healthier grass, you'll have a less likelihood of weeds infiltrating that healthy system.
I got you. Makes sense, but.
And I mean, I
Which,
tell,
which,
Not what
which
I said.
retains more nutrients,
Yeah.
which reduces stormwater, which helps the lagoon.
Okay.
and I recommend on the My Brevard yard to use azomite on the lawn and liquid seaweed, help it
I use
out.
the
Or you
fish-
could do your
I
own
use the
worm-
fish stuff
worm
that
tea.
stinks
Yeah.
like crap.
Worm
but-
tea,
Yeah.
You can make
Or
your
Yeah.
own.
crap smells like fish, but.
In Satellite Beach, do we need high salt tolerant plants?
Well, it depends on where you live.
So we're
I would-
very coastal.
Most of it.
Yeah,
Most
I
of
would
it.
say you're safer to just assume,
Moderate. I think you get away on some things. You could get away moderate salt
if
tolerance.
it's protected, yeah, like on the, if it's protected by a
If
building
you're
or
using
something.
a rain barrel to irrigate with, you're gonna reduce your salt in your
Mhm.
soil.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah.
I got a big fertilizer question
I
before you.
would like to get rid of the lawn service, because I feel like they cause more environmental, am I
Well,
right
if
or
you're
wrong?
gonna pick a lawn service, use one that's certified.
Because what I'd like to.
That's
is
where I
a
was ge-
list of, I'm willing to do the work to fertilize my lawn if it's within reason. Like every 3 months, I gotta throw a bag of fertilizer to get rid of the lawn service, because I know I need to do something with the
Well,
lawn.
first get
So-
it tested, and then you'll figure out what you need to fertilize with.
Just do
Right.
time.
Ask your lawn company. They need to have Green Industries Best Management Practice certification. They need to be certified. If they're applying fertilizer, by state law, they have to have a license to do so. Okay.
That's True Green, we've had
Oh,
it
yeah.
for 30 years, but I just want to.
Okay.
I don't know if they're
So I always tell people, because I hear from people a lot that, oh, my landscaper doesn't know what he's doing, or my lawn service doesn't know what he's doing. And I always say, who's the customer? If you don't like the service that he's providing, then fire him and find somebody who does. So you need to be interviewing these guys. If you want to have a lagoon-friendly, Florida-friendly landscape, you need to be interviewing these guys and asking these guys, how can you do this? And most of these landscapers, they want to do the right thing, and most of them are knowledgeable.
Thank you.
Hi.
But isn't
Thank
that-
you.
But isn't that what the city of Satellite Beach is supposed to be doing right now? Because I spoke to True Green the other day. They're knocking on every door now, right, trying to get business. And you ask the guy, you say, are you complying with the requirements here for the lagoon and for all the numbers?
Fertilizer ordinances and all that.
And I guess I have no idea what you're talking about. So are they really complying? And if they're not, who's making sure that there's an ordinance? Okay, who's enforcing
So
the ordinance?
during that time of year, right, during that June 1st
Yes.
period, I am out there looking and seeing who's working, and I will stop them, and if I see them fertilizing, I will stop them.
As a volunteer,
No, I work for the city. I'm an environmental programs coordinator. That's my job.
that's a position here?
Yeah.
Holy
He's
crap.
fertilizer police. Just kidding. That's not
Yeah.
what
Well, that's good.
I do it in a friendly way to try to educate, and we're going to create a workshop for them so they can come
Okay,
out and
so
learn.
it's
Try to
True-
incentivize them.
But they have to have Green Industries Best Management Practices certification.
So
The
we
University of
can-
Florida
yeah.
gives that certification, right? We're the ones that do that
Okay, so
certification.
is True Green compliant?
Personally, I don't know. I don't.
Yeah.
I would
can
say
find
they
out for
do.
you. I can find
If
out.
they're
I
applying-
don't want to say something that's
Hold
not
on,
true.
hold on. So True Green is a pest control operator, all right? So they have all the licenses to apply pesticide, all right? I know they do, okay? And they likely have the fertilizer license too, because they're a big company. They're going to do the right thing. The challenge that anybody has, any big company has, is that the guy that's knocking on your door is the tech, and so he may not be aware of all those things, but he still may be following the protocols, because that's what the True Green Company says do.
Yes, ma'am.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, but okay, so here's the guy right across the street. They have a beautiful green St. Augustine yard, very little weeds. They're spraying all the time. Right next to their yard on the very corner, with the grass right into it, is the storm drain.
Yeah.
So that's the guy I asked, hey, are you complying with stuff like that? Meanwhile, he's looking at my yard with some weeds, they're green, and pretty yellow flowers once in a while, right?
Right.
I mow it, stuff, are you complying? He has no idea. So the question still is he? And so I asked my neighbors, are you sure that they're doing the right thing? Hey, I got a beautiful green yard, what does it
They
matter?
don't care.
So there's the point. So I'm glad we have a position here in the city, because the lagoon is very important for all of us, but if they get to do what they want and there's no compliance or no penalty for them not complying, then what the heck?
You also should be checking even now,
Mhm.
because they should be using 50% slow release nitrogen and.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
And I
Well-
ask any resident that has any concern can anonymously call and report anything that they think is suspicious, and I'll go out and check it out.
But just because your neighbor's yard is nice and green doesn't mean that the company isn't in compliance, okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Right? You know what I'm saying?
Oh, certainly do.
Okay.
Certainly do.
Okay.
The fact he didn't know that they were complying or not was the
The
reason I
tech?
brought it up.
Yeah, because
But if he's just doing his job,
yeah, he's just doing his
Yeah,
job.
still be within.
It's his supervisors who have the licenses and who are the ones that tell him, go out and do this. But they're the ones that are telling him, this is your mix in your tank and this is how much you're going to apply.
Yeah,
Right.
I get you. There's a little more to it than that
So if
when
I
you
would
care about
find-
your job, though, right? And you'd like to think.
Not in that particular. We can talk about this, but
So if I would
it's,
find out that True Green
It would be
is
nice.
totally
Yeah.
environmentally compliant, and maybe I'm not ready to do my own lawn because it takes a lot of time, I guess that's something I would want to know, but I just don't trust that they're.
Do they give you what they're spraying? Do they give you a list?
of, but it's like Greek to me.
Right.
I speak Greek, so you can bring it to me.
Yeah.
yeah, you can always bring it to us.
I don't want to have to be checking on them all the time. If I know that I can't trust. this
Okay, so
company,
let me tell you something,
I'll
okay?
myself.
Because let me tell you that these landscapers, and I used to train all these guys, okay? So I know what's up here in their heads sometimes. First of all, product that they apply to the lawns is extremely expensive for them, okay? So they're not going to apply something for the sake of applying it, okay? If they can get away without applying any fertilizer and telling you they are, that's more likely what they're going to do before they're going to apply more fertilizer than what you want them to, okay? Because these products are extremely expensive, okay? And also I know that the majority of these landscapers want to do the right thing because they live here too and they love the lagoon also and they want to stay in business. So if you have questions about what your landscaper is doing, you need to quiz them. And if you don't understand the paperwork, get it to Nick, get it to us. We'll help you with the paperwork. But I just want to be clear that the landscapers are not the bad guys here, okay? Because I think sometimes they get beat up. And sometimes they deserve to be beat up. But sometimes we deserve to be beat up too. So, yeah, Karen.
I was curious, is there a place to go look to see what companies have gone through your certification? And
Yes,
everything?
yes.
The GIBMP though, that one is by person.
Not by company,
It's
right?
so you need to know the person's name, and then when we were checking for on the KBB site
Oh,
for
okay.
the lagoon friendly lawn, it says contractors.
They
You have to know, so like I was looking up someone and they were in Orange County when they got the license. So sometimes it can be difficult to find that.
But-
that would be used as people are gaining, I'm still educating more people, they're getting more interest, they're gonna wanna know, well, you know,
Right.
what do I know in my landscaping?
But they do have to have their certification with them in their vehicle, all right? And if they're applying fertilizer, they have to have their fertilizer license with them. And if they're applying Roundup or any kind of pesticide, they have to have their license with them. So that's, you can ask them to see their certifications.
The certification doesn't necessarily mean they're environmentally friendly.
It means that they've had training.
It means that they have gone through Green Industry's best management practices to apply fertilizers to protect water quality. Okay, this is all about protecting water quality. So they've been trained to apply fertilizer to protect water quality. I'll spit it out. Same with pesticides. They've been taught not to leave grass clippings on the road. So, and most of them don't. There are exceptions, and they're the ones that give everybody else a bad name, just like any profession that you name.
That is the most common thing you see, though, is they get the blower out and they blow the
Yeah,
grass into the center of the
That's your
field.
neighbors
That's
doing
90%.
that.
Neighbors do
The
it,
neighbors
and
do
the
it.
lawn
Yeah.
services
Well, lawn
do it
services
everywhere.
do.
Yeah.
And you
Nobody
say, hey,
speaks
come on. I
Nancy's
say it to my
doing it.
neighbor, and he doesn't care either.
Call
But the lawn
us.
services are doing it.
Let us know. We can contact the lawn service people company and we can report exactly when, where, who, what.
But you know, most,
That they're
most
not
of the guys,
allowed to do that?
No, they're not allowed to do
most of
that.
the guys we see in the city, though, like, you know, it's the two brothers have been doing it for a while, and they rotate.
And then you always have, John's brother has a truck and he's got a
Yeah.
mower and he helps
Yeah.
out
The
Bill.
bungalow.
And, you know.
Yeah.
And that's a good point too. They may not necessarily have had the
They
training,
won't have it.
okay?
No idea,
Yeah, but now I think they have to have the training to get a business license, right? That they have to have certification?
Don't know
Maybe
if
that's
they
a
do.
different county. It
I
might be a
don't think
different
so.
county.
What if you bring that up at council? We might be able to put that on the agenda.
yeah. It's to,
Well, if you want to adjust ordinances and those kinds of things in the future, that's the
I think
beauty
it's
of
more about
living
being a
in
good
city.
citizen, and that, you can start by, these workshops are great.
Absolutely.
More
Spreading the
Beachcaster.
information.
Yeah.
Put articles in the Beachcaster, that people read.
And to Karen's point, I mean, the UF has a wonderful program and to get people certified and trained and KBB has something that is an addendum to that. It's not a supplement for that same thing.
Right, yeah, it doesn't substitute for GIBMP certification
That's the
training
key.
is a DEP program. That was done by the Department of Environmental Protection, and they put UF in charge of, well, they didn't put UF in charge of it, but UF pretty much does most of the training. So, and then Florida Department of Agriculture oversees the fertilizer license, and so
I think we might have more of a problem of citizens not knowing.
I think you're right.
Yeah, I was just
That's
gonna.
across the board.
I think you're right. I do.
You're in Sally Beach, you're not supposed to blow the grass.
The entire
into the
county,
street.
you're not
Yeah,
supposed
yeah,
to.
Absolutely.
And what happens if you do?
Nobody will get you.
Well, you can
You have
call.
a
and we-
fine, you have
Call Nick.
a, please
and
don't
I
do
mean,
that.
technically, we could probably get them on a littering fine. I mean.
I don't know. You know, when the county instituted.
I can see everybody doing that in my,
Yeah.
except us.
Right.
So when the county instituted the fertilizer ordinances, I was part of I was part of it as an advisor to what the ordinances should say. And we acknowledge that, A, we're not going to have the funds to hire somebody to enforce this. We know this. But what this is it's a tool, it's an educational tool, right? So when you see somebody who's not blowing the clippings correctly, that's an opportunity then, whether it's you or Nick or somebody to go out there and say, hey, I just want to educate you, because sometimes they just don't know, right? So it's an opportunity to educate.
Blow it onto the.
Back
Onto
onto
the
the yard.
lawn.
So
Onto
on
the
one
lawn.
of
Their
my
property.
first slides there, we talked about how lawn clippings are
So it's
nutrients.
okay to blow it back onto the yard.
And organic.
Right,
As long as you
right.
blow it back on the yard.
Yeah, definitely not into water. That's even worse than onto the road.
Yeah. Or if you have to bag it up, bag it up.
And then hopefully use it around
Well,
your.
and there's no reason why you should bag it up.
I'm talking about they're physically in the street.
Oh,
Yes,
yeah.
getting it.
That's not their yard.
I've
Yeah.
seen it and I've stopped and I've told them,
Yeah.
you know.
Okay.
Yeah.
But it's
You'll be
there is
very
a
busy.
barrier to conversation between many individuals when it comes to stopping someone they don't know and telling them that they're doing something wrong. But I got over that a long time ago. So
Could you put an article in the Beachcaster?
I mean, we can say as a result of our workshop, we would love to,
Yeah.
invite people
A
to
reminder, yeah.
create this conversation. Yeah.
What's something I've spoke to the city about? One of the articles they should have. My mom used to write for the Beachcaster quite a bit, right? And she always, a lot of it was based on being a good citizen. And we could have a different article every month about what it is to be a good citizen. I mean, police, fire,
Yeah.
et cetera, could write articles, but so could the green side. And we've been, it's catching up so much momentum now here in the city about, hey, let's pay attention to green because lagoon's so bad. But yet, there's very little education and emphasis other than, luckily I read it here.
Well,
The Beachcaster said, come here and see it.
There's a lot of education happening out there. I think it's
You
just,
say it from your side because you're the educator, but as a citizen here, I can tell you that's not true.
so
It's the visibility. Of
it's
it.
the visibility, and
And that's what we have.
I haven't been where you are, but I've been where she is, and I've been where he is, and I've been where he is. So what I'm saying is, just because you and I haven't been in the room together yet, doesn't mean that we haven't. I mean, we're doing as much as we can. It's hard. Here's the challenge. First of all, this county is 72 miles long, right? And there's just me, and there's just her in our organization. There's just Nick and his, right? So it's really challenging, and just putting something in the newsletter isn't going to solve the problem.
It's a start.
We already do that stuff. No, maybe not your newsletter, okay? But Sally writes for Florida
Do
Today.
you guys get the Florida Today?
Sally's in, Sally.
Spaces? Do you see in the spaces section?
So my point is though that
I mean, I read a couple.
it's hard to reach everybody.
Oh, absolutely.
In this day and age, it is so hard to reach everybody.
Well, actually, we know that from social media, it's not. And one thing the city manager here does is a real good Facebook posting that she does on.
So do we.
things.
It's like
Yeah.
glance over.
We're on social media like crazy.
Which is where this video will air
Well, I'll tell you.
in the near future and on our
Say
city
that.
website.
I get what you're saying, but it's for you guys to solve. We're sitting here as citizens telling you that there is a definite lacking
Or at least
in,
put links to
in
them.
education in some of these areas you're talking about.
Right.
We've already identified some problems that we see every day.
Right.
So now we know Nick's a permanent member here in the city. There's a good source.
Right.
Nick, you're
But I would disagree with you that it's not our problem to solve. It's our problem to solve. And wait a minute, let me finish. You've been here tonight and you've learned some things. Now you take those things and you share them,
Of course I do.
right? So it's not just my job.
Our is a big O.
See every piece of information.
There's what you guys are presenting here today and the background you have, I still say that is fundamentally your issue to take care of. We have a huge burden of also being responsible in the city and doing the right thing, without a doubt. But there has to be a wider exposure that's going on here other than this, because I expected to be here and think there's gonna be like 30 people sitting here listening, because as soon as I read, I thought, this is exactly what I wanna hear about.
Yeah.
I mean, holy crap, I care about my city and my yard. I
Right.
wanna do the right thing.
And your
Sure.
neighborhood.
So
My
to
neighbor,
that
yeah,
point,
and all my neighbors that are not doing it right.
to
too.
that point, the pamphlet that we created with DEP, part of that educational outreach, it's going to the mailer. The workshop series will be posted in the mailer. The information will be there in the mailer, and you will get that in April, right in their time, so everybody gets a little education before Earth Day, before June 1st, so we can keep these conversations going. And I'm mailing it out to every resident in the city.
I got you.
Should get a mailer.
Does
As
anyone
long
live
as-
in Tortoise Island? Do you?
Are you kidding?
As long as they don't live in Lansing or
Yeah.
Torrance.
I'd say no.
That's a pretty fancy place. Yeah. Okay, so.
But even Tortoise Island is doing some good things too. I
Sure.
mean,
Well, that's why I asked, because
Yeah.
of the work
So
we're
how many
doing there.
businesses that work in this city that do either lawn care or fertilizing, pesticides, whatever, how many are registered here in the city?
I think we have, are we registered in the city as a business?
Yeah.
That is a question that is beyond my station that I can find the
Well,
answer to.
Well, I don't mean it to.
I do know
It's
this.
either all of them, or we only only get bits and pieces.
Well,
you
so
work
if
in
you're
the
registered
city-
with our county, you
If
can
you
still
work in the city and you have a business that
Yeah.
you work in this city, are you registered with the city so they know who you are?
You don't have to be.
You
There's
don't
no
have to
rule,
register.
there's no law that says you should.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I mean, the guy that mows the lawn, I'm asking because I don't know the answer.
Right.
By setting you up.
It's with the
Uh,
county.
It's a
Oh,
county
okay,
issue.
so the guy that mows the lawn, he's got a family business. Does he have a business license that Satellite Beach is aware of? No idea. Okay.
Possibly, probably.
So I would say everybody that has a business license, that works in the city, that does that business, which what we're talking about today, should be given a pamphlet and
Mhm.
notice that says, here's your freaking requirements, don't be blowing grass in the middle of the yard or the street anymore, and everything else that we've been talking about. That's a start. That's
So
a
I
huge
have a list of
exposure.
60 businesses that do business in the city.
Okay.
They are all getting part of that pamphlet. They are all getting that information. And we're reaching out to them specifically, to the head of that business, so that we can reach out to them and tell them that, you know, this is what we're trying to push. We have Lagoon Free Lawn, we have UF, we have the resources. We want to make sure that you're doing it because our residents are getting the same information and our residents are going to call you on it.
Well, and as I said earlier too, if they're a lawn company,
They-
by law, they are supposed to have the best
Yeah.
management practices training. So by law, they've already come through our office and gotten the training, right?
Yeah, they might need a reminder.
If they're applying.
Well, they
for
have to,
us.
they have to earn CEUs. They
Yeah.
have to earn continuing education credits and all that stuff, so.
Even
Now-
tonight, like I know all the
I think they have to get four,
next one.
4 hours a
My
year or something like that.
neighbors think
which is
tonight
good.
they love this, 'cause
At least
Yeah,
it's
but the
something.
guys I see don't go to these classes and
Word
they
of
don't
mouth.
get
Yeah.
education.
So yeah, you're
Who?
The people I see that are mowing around the neighborhood.
Now,
Well, it's possible.
I mean,
But
It's
if
quite
they-
possible.
They look
if
like
they-
they're struggling to live.
Yeah.
So
And they may not have had the GIBMP because it's only if you apply fertilizer. So if they're just purely mow and blow, they may not have had
that's
any of
such a
this.
good phrase. Wow, that's what they are.
Yeah, mow and blow.
Yep. Yep.
But they're prevalent in the city.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
and so
So
you
maybe
do
that's
have
the-
that problem. You do have that problem because they may not have any idea. They just have a business license and that's purely it.
Yeah, I got you.
Yep.
Well, thank you all for coming out. Please sign in before you leave today. I want to